We just want a warm meal. Please, said the alien mother, while Barefoot, freezing with her daughter. The storm had worsened by dusk. Varellus Nine's cold didn't come in waves, it was constant. Like pressure, it leaked through walls, slid under doors, and settled deep into the bones. No wind howled, just the grinding hum of generators, the distant clatter of loaders in the depot, and the faint crackle of frost crawling across metal. Near the far edge of the scrap district, between two collapsed freight ramps and a rusted waste compactor, a woman knelt in the snow. Her name was Karine Veluin, age 31, former caste consort from the Varellan diaspora, a group once bred and sold for fertility programs across fringe colonies. She hadn't chosen her life. She hadn't chosen Varellus 9. But after being discarded from the breeding registers and deported, it's where she landed. With a child, with no money, no shelter, and no allies. Her long white hair hung damp and tangled, framing a face dulled by fatigue and tight with tension. Her deep violet skin had a faint flush from the cold, but not enough to indicate warmth, just the sting of exposure. She wore what remained of her caste-issued attire, a reflective bodysuit, silver-toned, sleeveless and torn at the hips and thighs. It had once been designed for display, not for protection. Now, after months of use and cold nights against the steel ground, it barely clung to her frame. The thin fabric clung to her body, revealing every curve, every bruise. Her legs were bare. Her feet were naked. She pressed her palms into the snow to keep herself upright. Her joints ached. Her back burned from crouching. Beside her stood her daughter, Zaya, 5 years old. She had the same violet skin, but a lighter hue with short, choppy white hair and bright green eyes. Her oversized tunic was stitched together from market scraps and sackcloth, threadbare and wet from the snow. Her small feet were wrapped in soap-cloth strips, the toes of one foot poking through. Her cheeks were flushed red. Her nose had started to bleed. She didn't speak. She just held her mother's arm, looking around at the people who passed without glancing their way. Karine didn't want to be here. She had tried begging yesterday. One hand out, her voice steady. Most ignored her. One man grabbed her arm. She'd pulled back before he could say what he wanted. Zaya had cried that night. Today, she hadn't begged. She simply crouched, waited. Her only hope was that someone might stop. Across the alley, behind a reinforced steel door partially cracked open, a man stood watching. Roger Venn, 33, human, former terraforming engineer and now a mechanic, by trade and by necessity. After losing his team to a pressure system failure on a mining moon, he had left the core colonies and drifted toward the edges of human space. Varellus 9 wasn't where he planned to stay, but it had machines that needed fixing, and fewer people who asked questions. His work bay was tucked behind the depot's storage row. It was cluttered, greasy, dimly lit. He'd installed extra heaters, insulated the walls with stripped coolant foil, and rewired an old freighter's power core to run the lights. He didn't need much. One cot, one kettle, one toolbox. He was used to being alone. After the accident, solitude had stopped being a punishment. It became structure, predictable, safe. But now, watching the woman and child huddled against the snow, he felt something tighten in his chest. Not pity, not responsibility, just that nagging irritation of conscience, like a splinter under the skin that refused to stay quiet. He watched her stand once, then collapse back to her knees. Her head bowed low. Then she looked up and met his eyes through the crack in the door. She didn't blink. She didn't smile. She just whispered, "Please, we just want a warm meal." Her voice was raw, dry, and too calm. It wasn't desperation. She had passed that long ago. This was resignation. A line spoken not to persuade, but because silence hadn't worked. Roger stood still. He didn't answer, just turned and walked back into the bay. Karine thought he was gone, but 30 seconds later, the bay door hissed open fully. A rush of warm air spilled out into the alley, mixing with the steam rising from a crude electric kettle on a side table. Roger stepped aside, wordless, and left the entrance open. Karine didn't move at first. She looked at Zaya. The child's legs were shaking. She picked her up, slowly, carefully, and stepped inside. The heat hit her face like pressure. Her knees buckled for a second. She caught herself, set Zaya down on an overturned crate near the heater, then crouched beside her again. Roger didn't speak. He poured 2 metal bowls with thick vegetable broth, made from processed meal packs and boiled greens, and set them on a low table near them. A spoon clattered beside one bowl. No questions, no conditions. Eat, he said simply. Start slow. Her first. Karine reached for the bowl, hands trembling. She held the spoon to Zaya's lips. The girl sipped, then swallowed, eyes widening slightly. Roger watched her reaction. Quiet, measured. Karine finally lifted the spoon to her own lips. The taste was rough, artificial, oversalted but warm. Real. She held the bowl tightly in both hands, as if afraid it would vanish. Roger moved to the workbench. He sat, picked up a circuit board, started cleaning it with a cloth. Karine shifted. She stood slowly and walked to him, bowl in one hand. The other reached to unclasp the chest strap of her bodysuit. Reflex, not thought. Her back was straight, her jaw locked. She knew what usually came next. Roger didn't even turn. Don't, he said flatly. She stopped. You're not here for trade, he added, wiping a wire clean. You eat. You rest. That's all. Karine froze. Her fingers dropped from the strap. I don't have anything else to offer, she said, tone even. Not defensive, just honest. Roger glanced at her. Finally. You already did, he said. You asked for help. That's enough. The silence stretched. He stood and walked to a metal locker, pulled out a gray utility shirt, oversized but warm. Then a folded blanket. Put this on. Wrap the kid. You both sleep here tonight. I've got the bench. Karine took the shirt and held it against her chest. She looked down at Zaya, who had finished half the bowl and now curled her fingers into the hem of her tunic. Thank you, Karine said, voice quieter. Roger didn't reply. He returned to his tools. Zaya crawled into the cot under the blanket. Her breathing slowed. She murmured, Mommy, the warm man. Karine sat beside her, shirt draped around her shoulders, hair still wet, eyes fixed on Roger across the room. He didn't look up, but she noticed he hadn't touched his food. That night, sleep came slowly, not from comfort, but from exhaustion, from silence, from heat. Karine didn't trust it yet, but she no longer feared waking up cold. The sound of the storm outside had faded into a dull hush by morning. No pounding wind, just a low vibration, like the colony itself was groaning under the weight of cold and silence. Roger Venn sat on the bench, half awake, staring at the slow drip of condensation sliding down the heater casing. His shoulders ached. The metal surface beneath him was never meant for sleep, but it didn't matter. He wasn't used to sleeping well anyway. Across the room, the cot creaked gently as Zaya shifted under the blanket. Karine sat upright beside her, fully awake. She hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were fixed on the narrow workshop window. Layers of frost filtered the outside world into pale blue smears. Her arms were around her daughter's small frame, holding her in place as if some part of her still expected to be told to leave. Roger stood and crossed the room. He didn't say good morning. He didn't ask if she'd slept. Instead, he crouched beside the cot and looked at Zaya, whose breathing sounded tight and shallow. She's warm, Karine said before he could ask. Too warm. Roger reached out, hesitated, then gently pressed the back of his hand to Zaya's forehead. She didn't stir. Fever. Karine nodded. It started a day ago. She hasn't coughed, but her joints hurt. She cried all night before we came here. Roger stood. She needs medicine. I know. His jaw tightened as he moved toward the cabinet above his workbench. He opened it. Basic supplies, field dressings, burn cream, a stim dose half used. Nothing antiviral. Nothing useful. Shit. Karine didn't flinch. I tried at the depot clinic, she said softly. They won't see non-registered virulence. Not unless someone signs for you. Roger didn't answer immediately. He leaned on the bench, both hands pressed flat against the steel, staring at the far wall. The image of her in the snow returned. How she'd said nothing at first, just waited. Most people who begged in this district begged loudly. They cried, threatened, offered everything. Kareen had asked once, then gone quiet. That restraint stuck with him. Maybe, he said finally, I can get something. I know someone. Black market trade post near the loading track. Dangerous, but he might still owe me. Kareen looked at him directly. What would you trade? Roger's face hardened. Parts. Tech scrap. Will that be enough? It'll have to be. He grabbed his coat. Black leather, patched at the shoulders, reinforced with heating coils. He strapped a multi-tool to his belt, then moved to the entry panel. Kareen stood. Let me go. He turned back sharply. No. She stepped forward. You won't get medicine for free. If they see a human coming for Varellan meds, they'll hike the price or put a mark on your name. And if they see you, they might take you instead. She paused. You have a kid to protect, Roger added. Let me handle this. She nodded reluctantly. Before stepping out, Roger reached into a drawer and handed her a sidearm. An old MK-17 hand pulse, cracked near the grip, but functional. Only if someone tries to come in. Don't flash it. Don't use it unless you have to. Kareen held it like someone who had been given a key to a locked door she didn't believe would ever open. Why are you doing this? Roger shrugged. Don't know yet. He left. Outside, the storm had died down, but the streets were quiet in a way that felt wrong. Too many people had gone missing this week. Too many whispers about slavers making deals with syndicates again. Roger moved fast, past the transit yards, down a gated freight path. He knew the contact, Bran Malrex, ex-quartermaster turned scavenger king. Bran ran his exchange from a repurposed cargo container behind a scrap pile. Getting in wasn't the problem. Getting out with what you needed was. Back at the workshop, Kareen sat with Zaya again. The girl's breathing had shifted, no longer shallow, but labored. Her fingers twitched. She whimpered once in her sleep. Kareen took the utility shirt Roger had given her and soaked part of it in cool water from the corner tap, pressing it to her daughter's head. Her hands were steady, but her mind wasn't. This wasn't the first time she'd watched Zaya get sick. But before, there were others. Other castless mothers. A medical shelter. Even if they were cruel, they had structure. Here, there was nothing. She looked around the bay again. Crates stacked to the ceiling. Tools hanging from chains. One cot. One lamp. It wasn't home, but it was dry and quiet. And Roger hadn't asked for anything. She didn't understand him, and that scared her more than if he'd tried to touch her. Outside, hours passed. When Roger returned, his coat was slashed, and blood was seeping from a cut along his jaw. But he held a sealed dose pack in one hand and a grim expression on his face. Got it, he said. He handed her the injector. Use it now. 2 clicks, thigh muscle. She didn't ask questions. She followed instructions. When it was done, she wrapped her daughter tighter and whispered to her in Varellan, words Roger didn't recognize, but he understood the tone. Roger moved to the sink, washed the blood off, then wrapped a cloth around his arm. What happened? Kareen asked. Bran gave it to me, Roger said. Then one of his men followed me out and said they wanted more. I told them no. They'll come back. Probably. She looked at him. Calm, tired, focused. You could still send us away. Before they do, Roger shook his head. They'll come whether you're here or not. If you leave, you'll die in the snow. If you stay, maybe you won't. He sat down. Zaya stirred in her sleep, her breathing steadier. For the first time since arriving, Kareen allowed her body to relax. Not fully, but enough. She watched Roger. He didn't smile. He didn't look proud. Just sat there, holding pressure against his own wound. Why are you like this? She asked quietly. He met her eyes. Because someone once gave me a warm meal when I didn't ask. That night, she didn't sit beside the cot. She sat closer to the bench, not touching him, but not far either. The next morning came slowly. A dull haze clung to the workshop's reinforced windows. Outside, the storm had shifted into a gray sleet, less violent than snow, but colder somehow, wetter, heavier. The colony's power grid had flickered overnight, enough for one of the heaters to fail and force Roger to jury-rig a backup coil from an old rail battery. He hadn't slept. Again, Kareen stirred first. She sat upright, blinking slowly, still wrapped in Roger's shirt. The metal floor under her made her joints stiff, but her eyes darted straight to the cot. Zaya. The child was still breathing. Deeper now. The fever had broken. Her cheeks no longer flushed deep violet, but had faded to their normal soft hue. Her brow was dry. Karine let out a long, quiet breath, like she'd been holding it all night. Roger didn't say anything when she looked over at him. He was already up, stripping broken capacitor housing off a damaged servobot head. His jaw was bruised from the fight with Brand's man, but he'd cleaned and bandaged the wound. His right knuckle was torn, and a line of dried blood stained the edge of his wrist. "I was going to ask if you slept," he said without looking up, "but I already know the answer." Karine stood slowly, her muscles sore but functional. She poured a small amount of clean water from a plastic canister into the same dented bowl she'd eaten from 2 nights ago, rinsed her face, then did the same for her daughter. "She's better," she said simply. "Yeah, that dose should hold, but she'll need another one in about 6 days. If we're still here." Karine's eyes narrowed faintly. "Do you expect us not to be?" Roger finally looked at her. His tone stayed neutral, but his words were careful. "I expect them to come back for what they think I owe them, and I expect they won't knock first." He motioned to a stack of crates near the back wall. "That one's false. Hollow. If it goes bad, take the kid, crawl through, and wait until I give the all clear or you hear nothing for 10 minutes. Then leave." Karine walked over and tested the crate panel. It opened with a soft click. Inside was a tight crawl space, just enough for a child and an adult to press together. Dark, insulated, lined with spare coolant tubes and sealant rolls. "You built this before we arrived," she said. Roger nodded. Didn't like company back then either. Her gaze lingered on him. "Why are you alone, Roger?" He paused. Didn't answer immediately. She didn't press. Instead, she stepped closer and picked up a bundled strip of cloth, one of Zaya's foot wraps, still damp from the first night. She began rewrapping it, slowly, carefully. Her hands were efficient, experienced. "I had a crew," Roger said eventually. "On Gallon 2. Terraforming team. Mid-phase ice melt. I was lead systems tech." Karine listened without interrupting. "One of the sub-zero exhaust units failed. Chain reaction. Flash pressure breach. Killed 6 of them. I survived. Wasn't supposed to. My name got cleared. Got offers to join new teams." His fingers tightened around the capacitor. "Didn't take any of them. So you came here." "Yeah. This place doesn't ask much from anyone. Which suits me." Karine's expression didn't change, but her tone softened. "You didn't run away. I didn't stay either." That quiet settled between them again. Not cold, just matter of fact. Zaya groaned gently and turned over in her sleep. Her body twitched, then relaxed. Karine moved to the cot, brushed the hair from her daughter's face. "I was sold to the Outer Branch Cask Consortium when I was 15, she said without looking up. Trained for fertility service. Got assigned to a rotation of bidders for 6 years. I conceived 3 times. Only Zaya lived. After the 3rd, they said I was failing expectations. They removed my status and deported me with my daughter. My record was marked unfit for programmatic reintegration." Roger didn't respond right away. He leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. "That's what they called it. They didn't say it to me. They stamped it on the papers they shoved in my hands while I was naked in a customs bay." More silence. Karine finally looked at him. "You want to know why I didn't scream that night? Why I didn't beg harder?" Roger nodded, barely. "Because I already lived through begging, and I already learned it doesn't help." He didn't argue. Instead, he said, "There's a supply carrier docking in 3 days. Small cargo hauler. Mostly smuggled salvage. If we can reach it, we might be able to get off this rock." Karine stood slowly. "You'd leave?" Roger's voice was steady. "Not for me." She studied him. The exhaustion in his eyes, the roughness in his hands. The way he never asked questions unless it mattered. He had let her in without reason. Risked his name to get medicine. Fought men who might return in force. "You're not trying to save us, are you?" she asked. "No. I'm trying to make sure I don't have to bury anyone else." That struck her harder than she expected. Outside, a sudden thud echoed. Distant but heavy. Then a second. Closer. Roger moved immediately, shutting the heater off and signaling with 2 fingers toward the back crate. Kareen didn't hesitate. She scooped Zaya into her arms, blanket and all, and crawled into the compartment. Roger slid the panel shut behind her. Then he stood and waited. Someone pounded on the bay door. Roger flexed his fingers once, then walked toward it, boots silent on the metal floor. He didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for a wrench and said calmly, "You picked the wrong damn time." The lights dimmed slightly, and the door began to open. The door opened with a low hydraulic groan, then stopped halfway, jammed by Roger's manual override. A gust of sleet blew in, carrying with it the sharp smell of rust, oil, and cold sweat. 3 men stood just beyond the threshold, all locals, but not from the depot. They wore makeshift armor pieced together from plating and insulated coats, stitched with red armbands, the kind Brand Maurex used to mark as runners. The one in front, broad shoulders, shaven head, visor goggles pushed to his brow, stepped forward and kicked the door hard enough to shake loose one of Roger's hanging tools. "Then," he called out, "we had a deal." Roger didn't move from the bench. The wrench in his hand stayed low, just hanging like it belonged there. "I brought you scrap," he said calmly. The man stepped in. "You brought tech scrap for high-dose antiviral." His boots clunked against the metal floor. "Brand says that's not even close to fair." Roger didn't answer. His eyes flicked once, checking the crate panel. Still closed. Still undisturbed. Behind the enforcer, another man came in. Thinner, wiry. He had a baton clipped to his belt and a suppressed pistol slung across his chest, casual. The third stayed outside, blocking the alley. "What do you want?" Roger asked. "Payment," the bald one said. "Retroactive." Or the girl. Roger's voice flattened. No deal was made for people. She's caste discarded. No registration. No record. She's not people in this district. Roger took a step forward. "Then you're in the wrong fucking district." The second man moved to flank him, eyes scanning the room. His gaze lingered on the cot, then the empty food bowls. "She's still here," he said with a smirk. "You're sheltering fugitives now," the bald one added. "Not fugitives," Roger replied. "Refugees." The second man stepped closer. Same difference to Bran. There was a pause, tight, thin, brittle. Then the bald one reached for his baton. Roger moved first. The wrench caught the man's wrist mid-draw. Bone cracked, the weapon clattered. The second enforcer lunged, but Roger grabbed him by the coat and slammed him into the support beam beside the heater, rattling the entire unit. The third, still outside, rushed in, but tripped on the threshold as Roger threw the second man into his path. Fists hit steel. A tool rack came down. A heater sparked. Kareen heard all of it from the dark. She held Zaya against her chest, breath frozen, heart hammering. Then came the worst sound. Silence. 10 seconds. 20. Then footsteps. The crate panel hissed open, just a crack. Roger's voice, low and firm. "He's out. It's safe." Kareen crawled out, still holding Zaya. She looked past him. One man lay unconscious, face down, nose broken. Another groaned near the bench, blood leaking from his ear. The third was gone, fled or worse. Roger wiped his mouth. Blood smeared across his palm. "They're going to come back," Kareen said quietly. "Not soon," he replied. "I made sure." Her eyes scanned the damage. "You're bleeding." He shrugged. "Better me than you." She looked at him, really looked, and the full weight of the moment hit her. He could have turned them in, could have walked away. Instead, he fought off 3 armed men with nothing but tools and a bad attitude. And now he stood in front of her, chest heaving, blood drying at his temple like none of it mattered. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know." She set Zaya down gently on the cot. The child stirred but didn't wake. "Fever gone. Pulse strong. Warm." Then Kareen turned back to Roger. She stepped in close. Her fingers, still shaking, reached up and touched his jaw, softly, just under the bruise. He didn't flinch. "You keep doing things that don't make sense," she whispered. He met her eyes. "You want me to stop?" She shook her head. Then, slowly, she leaned in and pressed her forehead to his. Not an offer. Not a transaction. Just contact. Real. Human. He stayed still. She let her hand rest against his neck. His skin was warm, rough, alive. I've never owed someone like this, she said. You don't, he replied. That's the point. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. Not entirely, but enough to stay. That night, she curled up on the cot beside Zaya, her arms stretched behind her, fingertips resting just inches from the bench where Roger sat in silence, listening to the storm return outside. Neither of them spoke again, but neither of them slept alone. Sunu Dadin. The following morning was silent, too silent. No knocking, no shouts, no engine rumble from the depot. Just a blanket of gray over the colony. It was the kind of stillness that felt unnatural, like something was building beneath it. Roger was the first to stir. He sat hunched at the edge of his workbench, one boot on the floor, the other resting on a half-crushed tool crate. His jaw still ached from the hit, and his knuckles were swollen, but he'd cleaned the wounds. The worst was already scabbing. Across the room, Zaya coughed softly. It was the first sound she'd made in nearly a full day. He looked over. Karine was curled around her daughter protectively, one arm across the child's chest. Her eyes were closed, but she wasn't asleep. Her body was too alert, too rigid. She was listening, breathing slow, trying not to show it. Zaya stirred again, then whispered, "Mommy." Karine opened her eyes at once and shifted closer. "I'm here." The girl blinked up at her, voice small. Did the loud men go away? Karine brushed her fingers through her daughter's tangled white hair. "They're gone." Zaya nodded once, slowly. Then her eyes drifted toward Roger. She stared at him for a long time before speaking again. "He made them go?" Roger offered a faint smile. "I made them leave, yeah." Zaya's mouth moved like she wanted to say something else, but instead she ducked her face into her mother's shoulder. "She's remembering too much," Karine said softly. "She always does after someone raises their voice." Roger didn't comment. Instead, he stood and walked to the heating unit. He turned up the dial until the coils glowed orange, then moved to the far crate, where he pulled out the last sealed ration pack. "I'll cook something," he said. "You both need real food." Karine looked around. "You're running low." "I know." He didn't offer more. He heated the pack, added water, stirred in powdered vegetables, thin but hot. He poured a third into a separate bowl, smaller, and set it gently near Zaya. The girl sat up slowly, still bundled in her blanket. Her hands reached for the bowl, but hesitated. Karine lifted the spoon, tested the temperature, then gave it to her. Zaya took a bite, chewed quietly, and nodded once with approval. "She likes it," Karine said. "She has low standards," Roger muttered. Zaya gave a tiny smile. It was the first time Roger had seen it. After the meal, Roger started repairing the servo joint that had been knocked off the wall during the fight. The workshop bore the marks of the scuffle, blood streaks, a bent beam, a cracked lamp, but nothing permanent. Still, it made him uneasy. If Brand's men didn't come back today, they would soon. And next time, they wouldn't knock. Karine helped clean, quietly, methodically. She didn't ask for direction, didn't speak unless necessary. She found missing bolts, picked up shattered glass with a rag, realigned the heater that had come loose. At one point, Roger caught her staring at the door. "You want to leave?" he said. "No," she replied. "I want to know if you still want us to. I didn't ask you to stay, but you didn't tell us to go." He tightened a bolt. "I meant what I said. You're not a debt. Then why are you preparing to die for us?" He didn't answer. She didn't press. That night, Roger was working late, recalibrating the backup generator, when he noticed the faint blinking light on the terminal near the main door. Incoming file request. Unauthorized signal trace. He froze, then opened the log. Someone had pinged the system's ID marker twice. Not from the depot, not from Brand's men. A colony-wide query. Civil registration scan. He turned to Karine immediately. "Did you ever register when you arrived?" She shook her head. "They wouldn't let me. Said I had no sponsor." "Then you're officially unlisted, which makes me a ghost." Roger checked the terminal again. The trace was partial, not yet direct, but close. Someone was trying to map heat signatures, looking for non-human thermal profiles. Probably part of sweep. "Government?" Karine asked. "Worse," Roger muttered. Corporate bioreclamation. Cleanup crew. Her face went pale. That means they're not here for justice. They're here to erase anyone without a profile. You and Zaya are a threat on paper. What do we do? He paused. Then look at the old cargo sled buried beneath spare paneling. Heavy, low profile, designed for hauling illegal salvage through cold zones. We leave. When he looked back at her, serious. Now, Karine didn't hesitate. She turned, gathered Zaya, still half asleep, and wrapped her in both blankets. Roger threw open the false crate. Inside was the modified sled. Long, dark, padded with insulation foam. He opened the cavity beneath it and fitted the pulse battery. Get in. You'll both fit. There's a vent tube. It'll keep air flowing. What about you? I'll push it halfway, then meet you at the harbor. Roger, I know this place better than they do, but you need to go now. Zaya looked up from her mother's arms. Are you coming too, war man? Roger crouched beside her. I'll be there soon. I promise. Zaya reached out and touched his cheek. You're not like the others. Roger didn't know what to say to that, so he nodded and closed the sled door behind them. As the lights flickered again, signaling the start of another grid scan, he turned toward the front gate, wrench in one hand, data stick in the other. He was ready, but this time, he wasn't just protecting a guest. He was protecting his people. The harbor zone was less a port and more a rusted sprawl of forgotten cargo decks and half-decommissioned freighters. The outer sectors were unguarded, but that didn't mean safe. Corporate reclamation teams had moved in by nightfall, quiet, efficient, and armed with scanners designed to sweep entire blocks in seconds. They weren't soldiers. They were cleaners, and they didn't take prisoners. Roger moved fast, keeping to the side tunnels. He had mapped the area weeks ago while scrounging for usable coils. Now, every corridor felt shorter, tighter, less forgiving. He paused near a grated access hatch and keyed in a sequence on a handheld. The sled, concealed beneath a stack of industrial tarps, responded with a faint vibration. Inside, Karine clutched Zaya tightly as the sled glided across the cold floor, silent, guided by Roger's remote commands. It wouldn't pass a heat scan. It barely masked a human presence. They had maybe 10 minutes before patrols crossed this quadrant. Inside the sled, Zaya whispered, "Why is it so quiet?" Karine hushed her gently. "We're almost there." The girl nodded. "I'm not scared if you're holding me." Outside, Roger stepped around the corner and froze. Two figures in dark coats, rifles slung low, were scanning the cargo lane just ahead. Their gear bore the mark of the Veltrax Bioreclamation Division, a division infamous for recovering biological assets outside their licensing zones. Varellan castaways like Karine weren't seen as citizens. They were treated as unclaimed property, worth money, disposable. Roger ducked behind a container stack, pulled a small disruptor from his belt, a tool, not a weapon, but enough to fry a scanner at close range. He tapped once in his comm stick, pinging the sled to slow. But then a voice rang out, female, cold, professional. Thermal irregularity. Moving. North lane. Confirming. They'd seen it. Roger didn't think. He sprinted across the deck, burst from cover, and activated the disruptor. The signal spiked. One of the enforcers turned, too late. The scanner unit on his hip sparked, overloaded. What the? The second officer swung his rifle. Roger slammed into him, shoulder first. They both hit the ground hard. The rifle clattered away. Alarms triggered instantly. Not loud, just a red strobe pulsing at the edges of the deck. More would come. From the sled, Karine heard the impact. Then saw him, Roger, fighting on the deck with two larger men, one trying to stand, the other drawing a blade. She didn't wait. She opened the sled manually, set Zaya down behind the nearest support column, and ran. Her feet hit the deck with precision. Her body moved fast, too fast for someone who'd nearly collapsed in the snow days ago. She reached the second officer just as he drew the blade, and slammed his head into the wall once, twice. He went limp. Roger looked up at her, breathing hard, bloody lips split again. "I told you to stay hidden. You said we're not a debt. So stop treating me like one." He stared at her, just for a second, and something shifted. Then they heard it. Boots. 4, maybe 5 men, approaching from the east lane. Roger grabbed her hand. We move now. They ran together, ducking through the industrial ducting line toward the outbound crawler platform. Zaya, hearing them, peeked from behind the pillar, eyes wide but calm. Roger swept her up with one arm and didn't stop. They reached the crawler, an old transport rig barely holding together, its engine cold. Roger jammed the panel, bypassed the lock, and dumped them inside. He sealed the hatch, then climbed to the cabin and started the ignition sequence. Nothing. Dead. Karine reached beside him, pulled an old ignition coil from her coat, salvaged from his bench earlier. You're welcome. Roger snapped it in. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. They didn't wait. The crawler jolted forward, wheels screaming against the metal deck as Roger pushed the throttle. Behind them, lights flashed, voices called, someone fired, but the bulk of the crawler absorbed the shots. They crashed through the perimeter gate and hit the icy terrain beyond the harbor. The crawler's lights cut through mist and snow. Inside, the wind howled through the cracks. Zaya clung to Karine, her voice muffled in her mother's chest. Then she whispered, "We're still together, right?" Roger looked back from the cabin, eyes locking with Karine. She didn't answer immediately. She reached forward and pulled Zaya closer between them, then rested her free hand over Roger's on the throttle. "Yes," she said, "we are." The crawler moved forward into the white wasteland. They had no map, no beacon, but they had each other, and no one would take that again. 2 days passed. The crawler broke down outside the Habzone rim, its coolant lines frozen and cracked from overuse. Roger had expected it wouldn't last far beyond the harbor. It had only needed to get them far enough, and it had. They pushed the rest of the way on foot, skirting the edge of the abandoned geothermal mining corridor that stretched beneath the cliffs. The wind was different out here. Still brutal, still cold, but quieter. No patrol drones. No flashlights cutting through snow. No voices barking orders through loudspeakers. Just the hiss of ice shifting under their boots. Zaya was wrapped in both blankets, tucked tight against Karine's chest as she trudged forward, her steps heavy, controlled. Roger stayed close, one hand on Karine's back, the other holding a repurposed tool turn blade in case anything moved where it shouldn't. At dusk, they reached it. A half-collapsed power substation wedged between two natural ridges. Forgotten infrastructure from Varelis 9's first colonization cycle. The entrance was narrow and iced over, but the interior still retained heat. Roger forced the hatch, cut the manual override, and guided them inside. It wasn't much. Concrete floor, stripped wiring, a generator that hadn't run in a decade. But it was shelter. Karine set Zaya down on a pile of bundled cloth Roger had carried in his pack. The girl stirred briefly, then curled up without protest. Her breathing was steady, her skin warm. She was safe. Karine sat down slowly. Her legs buckled beneath her before she meant them to, and Roger caught her just before she hit the floor. He lowered her the rest of the way, kneeling beside her. His hands hovered near her shoulders, unsure, then settled. She looked up at him, eyes rimmed red from wind and exhaustion. Her voice came out low. "You didn't have to come this far." Roger shook his head. "Yeah, I did." "Why?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached up and gently brushed the frost from her cheek, his fingers trailing the edge of her jaw. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she leaned in, not cautious, not shy. She pressed her forehead to his, the same way she had once before, but this time, her lips followed. A slow, soft touch. Not desperate, not transactional, just real. His arms went around her, holding her not to possess, but to keep her steady. Her body relaxed against his. She didn't shake anymore. When they finally pulled back, Karine whispered, "You're not like any man I've ever known." Roger replied, "I'm not trying to be." They stayed close, sharing heat in the half-dark, their bodies resting against each other, breath slowing in rhythm. There was no need for more words. Everything that mattered had already been spoken without speaking. Later, after a meal of dry rations and melted snow, Roger rechecked the sled's data module. The outbound ping they'd launched from the harbor had gone through. A reply had come back, encrypted but unmistakable. It was from an old contact, a technician who owed Roger a favor. A small transport was en route. Quiet. No questions. 3 seats. Departure in 2 days. When Kareen heard, she didn't smile. She simply nodded, took his hand, and said, "We won't be running any more after this." Roger didn't correct her. Zaya stirred in her sleep again, then mumbled, barely awake, "Are we home?" Kareen looked over at Roger. He met her eyes. If you want it to be. Kareen lay back down beside her daughter, hands still resting in Roger's. Her body softened in his sleep for the first time in what felt like months. Roger stayed awake a while longer. But this time, it wasn't out of fear. It was because, for the first time, he didn't feel alone. As the frost settled on the old substation roof and silence reclaimed the frozen ridge, one last voice cut through the quiet. Zaya, sleepy but certain, whispered, "Warm man, you belong to us now." Roger didn't reply. He just smiled, closed his eyes, and finally slept. The frost had long retreated from the southern basin of Varellus Nine's abandoned ridge sector. Spring, such as it was on this fractured colony world, came not with flowers but with steady weather, thawed pipes, and the hum of working systems that no longer threatened to fail with every gust of wind. The small homestead Roger had built stood just beyond the tree line of a geothermal outflow, powered by a buried generator salvaged from the substation. It was simple, metal siding, insulated walls, a working stove, but it was theirs. Inside, warmth filled the room. Zaya sat on the floor beside a low table, carefully assembling something from scrap, a little toy made of broken circuit plates and wire. Her hands moved with care. She was humming softly, a tune she'd learned from Kareen. Roger sat nearby, wiping his hands clean after repairing the solar relay outside. His beard was fuller now, his face a little more relaxed. He still moved like a man expecting things to fall apart, but less often now, less guarded. The door to the back room slid open with a soft hiss. Kareen stepped out, barefoot on the warm metal floor, wrapped in a soft gray robe that clung loosely to her body. Her long white hair had grown thicker, tied in a low braid. Her eyes held that same quiet intelligence, but softened now. No fear, no tension, and resting her hands over her belly, now clearly rounded, she looked at Roger. He stood. "You all right?" he asked, stepping to her without hesitation. She nodded slowly, then let his hand rest on her side. "She's kicking more," Kareen said. Roger's brow lifted. "She?" Kareen smirked faintly. "Zay is certain," she said. "It has to be his sister. So I can teach her not to be scared of snow." Roger let out a quiet breath and leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered. "A home. A child born for love, not orders." His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close. "You deserve all of it." She looked up at him. "So do you." From the corner, Zaya called out, "Mom." "Roger, I made her a toy. It's out legs and everything." Kareen smiled. "Bring it here, sweetheart." As Zaya rushed over, cradling the crude little creature in her hands, Roger stepped back and let them both sit beside Kareen on the small padded bench. The 3 of them huddled close, surrounded by warmth, the scent of steamed bread baking from the stove, and the quiet hum of peace. Outside, the wind no longer howled. Inside, everything felt settled. And as the evening lights dimmed and Zaya drifted to sleep between them, Kareen whispered into Roger's chest, "She'll be born in safety, with a name we choose." And Roger, arms around both of them, replied with the only words that mattered, "She'll be born free."